everyone, welcome to this live stream that is brought to you by CAT by LPT. Now guys, we are running this tough enough question series where we practice questions that gives you the kind of difficulty that you see in the CAT paper. And today what we are going to do is we are practicing some questions of para summary which is of the level of CAT and something that gives you the similar kind of difficulty level as well. Right, so I'll wait for some other people to join me soon so that we can start with the session and practice those questions. Now guys, I'm sure that you are in the final lap of your preparation towards CAT 25 and by this point of time you already have a clear idea as to how you are going to attempt these questions. It is just that before the final D-Day, it is all about maintaining that calm. It is sticking to the routine and making it sure that you take as many sectionals as possible, write these mocks and make it sure that the analysis is done properly. Right, so I think we are good to start. So let's go to the solving of questions here. Good evening everyone. Chalo. I hope I'm clearly audible and visible, so it's all clear between us. Now let's move further. Right, so there is a small information that LPT is conducting an all India open mock for CAT on Sunday, that is tomorrow. And if you are somebody who is preparing for CAT 2025, you can take this CAT before CAT absolutely free. So please register yourself. Here is the information here. So it gives you a real-time experience, it gives you success assessment, and it also gives you pre-preparedness for with respect to your attempt of the mock paper just before CAT. Right, so take this mock, you will have analysis on the YouTube as well, so you will find those support system that is given to you. So make sure that you are writing this mock and there will be analysis on YouTube of the entire sections. That is where you can deal with it. Right, so let's just now go to the next part, which is the solving of question. Now before you start solving the first question guys, one or two things that I would want to hint at when you are doing para summary questions. Para summary question of course is about the comprehension part. So how well can you understand the text that is given to you, and more important than that, it is all about how do you eliminate the choices. So for those of you who are watching me and solving these questions, here is the first question for you, right? Try attempting this question and then we will discuss as to how do we arrive at the answer. Right, so here is the passage guys. Start solving this one. So first question of para summary for you to try. 4 options, a paragraph and an answer. Just quickly read it through and try to look at the options and try to come up with an answer. Alright guys, so I hope you have read the paragraph and you would also have a look at the option choices here. And when it comes down to solving a para summary question, I've often told you that it's all about the elimination process that is important. So let us try to solve this passage. Let us first understand what are the key points here and then look into the options as to which one is a flawed option and which could be something that could aptly catch the essence of the passage. So it says, freedom, often exalted as the highest ideal of human existence, paradoxically thrives on limitation. So we are referring to freedom here, and it says the highest ideal of human existence paradoxically thrives on limitation. A society that demands absolute liberty without restraint often finds itself descending into chaos. Okay, so there is a fallout here. So it says descending into chaos, where one person's freedom becomes another's oppression. Rules, laws and moral codes, those very constraints we rebel against, ironically create the framework within which genuine freedom can be exercised. So this is what it is referring to, that genuine freedom can only be exercised with respect to these constraints. Now, ironically create the framework within which genuine freedom can be exercised. The artist needs the discipline of form to produce beauty. The thinker needs the rigor of logic to produce truth. So this is similar kind of a comparison being made here. Now it says thus. So here is where the conclusion is coming into the picture, and that is what you are dealing with. So it says, thus freedom without order is not liberation but dissolution. What complicates this paradox is that the boundaries required for freedom are themselves products of social consensus, which can easily be manipulated by those in power. So again, it gives you a constraint and it tells you that it is products of social consensus, which can easily be manipulated by those in power. The individual must therefore navigate between submission and rebellion, between societal norms and personal conscience, to experience authentic freedom. So this is the requirement that the author is giving us with respect to the authentic freedom. True liberty then may not lie in doing what one wants, but in wanting what one ought to do. So this is basically talking about freedom with constraints. So the paradoxical implication here is that freedom cannot be exercised with absolute liberty. It is these constraints that make it the real freedom. Let's go to the options and see to it which options capture this essence and which does not really fall into the line. Let's evaluate option A. It says, while society imposes boundaries on personal liberty, these constraints are essential to maintaining collective harmony and personal morality. Now see guys, if you look at this option, this does not mention freedom at all. Alright, it simply says that while society imposes boundaries on personal liberty, it is like personal liberty, these constraints are essential to maintaining collective harmony. Now this is not emphasized by the passage, and personal morality. So these are the 2 pointers where you can say that the option is again something that can be eliminated. So A is cancelled out. Let's look at B. It says freedom achieves meaning only within a structure of limitation. So we did talk about the fact that freedom can be exercised with respect to the limitations that prevent it from collapsing into chaos. So the paragraph also mentions that here it says a society that demands absolute liberty without restraint often finds itself descending into chaos, and this effect has been given here as well. So it says from collapsing into chaos, though such boundaries are socially and politically fragile. So it does talk about the fact that, look at this part, it says freedom without that order is not liberation and dissolution. And then it talks about social consensus, which can easily be manipulated by those in power. So this is the kind of information that we were looking for. So should be kept aside because it is much better than option number A. Alright, let's evaluate C and D as well. C says individual freedom is possible only when one rejects societal norms. The author does not say that one has to reject the societal norms and embrace self-determined principle. This is not supported by the paragraph that we just read. So this manipulates or changes the essential information that the paragraph is trying to give to us. So C can also be eliminated. Let's evaluate D. D says the pursuit of absolute liberty inevitably destroys social cohesion. Now the author or the paragraph does not say that the pursuit of absolute liberty destroys social cohesion and undermines moral responsibility. It does not talk about constraint. It does not talk about chaos that the author has talked about. So even this can be eliminated. Out of these four choices, the choice that captures the essence of the paragraph precisely is option number B. So that makes to be the correct answer. And I hope, see, again, when you solve a para summary question, it is about identifying which information has to be in the ideal summary and which of the information is that you can simply let go with. So it's all about understanding the gist of the paragraph and looking for similar options when you practice the questions. So let's go to the next question now. That was question number 1. Let's go to question number 2. Right, so you have question number 2 here. Try doing that. Question number 2. Try doing the question. Just read through the paragraph, try to identify the main points, eliminate your choices and come up with an answer. Okay, so I hope you have read the paragraph and you have understood the finer points. That was mainly the main points of this paragraph, and then we are looking at the options. Let's quickly read through the paragraph and try to identify the key points and see whether we can answer this question. So it says, modern societies often take pride in their meritocratic ideals, claiming that hard work and talent determine success. Okay, so it talks about modern societies taking pride in meritocratic ideals, claiming that hard work and talent determine success, yet. So you have a transition word coming up here. So there is a change of thought. It says, yet the very notion of meritocracy masks deep structural inequalities. Okay, so this is what the author is saying. So he started off with something positive, that modern societies take pride in meritocracy, where you say that hard work and talent determine success. But then he has used a transition word here, which is yet, and it says the very notion of meritocracy masks deep structural inequality. So it is the point that the author is emphasizing, that it masks or it hides deep structural inequalities. Access to quality education, early exposure to opportunities, and inherited cultural capital often skew the playing field along before individual efforts enter into the equation. Okay, now this is also important because there are other factors influencing. Now, the privileged can afford to fail, to experiment, to take risk. Luxury is rarely available to those at the margins. So it talks about the privileged and it talks about those at the margins. Ironically, the rhetoric of meritocracy turns systemic inequality into individual failure. So it says, again, the author has a negative view of meritocracy. So he says that it transforms into systemic inequality, into individual failure. If you don't succeed, it must be your fault. The myth persists because it comforts both winners and losers. The former justify their status, the latter cling to hope. True equality, therefore. So now the author has talked about deep structural inequalities, and now he talks about the fact that true equality, therefore, demands not merely open competition but an honest reckoning with the invisible scaffolds that hold some aloft and weigh others down. So basically it was all about meritocracy, and author has a view wherein they say that it leads to structural inequalities in the first place. So this was the essence that we were talking about. Let's now go to the options and try to figure out which of these options captures this essence. A says meritocracy is a fair system. Again, the author is someone who is against the ideals of meritocracy because he has talked about it that it leads to structural inequalities. So it's an unfair system. It says meritocracy is a fair system undermined by individual laziness and lack of effort among the disadvantaged. Now this is something that is not the essence of the passage, so it could be easily eliminated. Let's look at B. B says, while societies claim to reward merit, all right, structural inequalities ensure that success is still heavily influenced. Okay, this is problematic here. Now, the author is against structural inequalities because he says that meritocracy as a phenomena masks structural inequalities. Now, this says structural inequalities ensure that success is still heavily influenced by privilege and inherited advantage. Okay, so this is again something which is problematic, can be cancelled out. Let's look at C. C says equality of opportunity has been achieved. We have not talked about this, but inequality of outcome remains unavoidable due to personal choices. Nothing like this has been mentioned in the paragraph, nor does it form the gist of the passage that we were talking. The gist was inherently about the fact that meritocracy as a phenomena mask deep structural inequalities, and that is what we are looking at it. Let's look at D. It says modern society's disguise. Okay, so here it uses the term mask, and here it says disguise inequality as meritocracy to maintain social stability and justify disparities in success. So this is what the paragraph was stressing on, that when you talk about meritocracy as a phenomena, it is something that masks deep structural inequalities, and that is how the winners and the losers, they justify in terms of the disparity that is being caused. So if you compare these options, C is cancelled out, the answer would be option number D. Alright, that was the second question. Let's now move on to question number 3. Yeah, so you have the third question here. Try doing that. Alright guys, so quickly go to the options and try to eliminate your choices. Okay, so I hope you have read the paragraph and you would by now have figured out what are the important points here. Let's quickly read it through. So it says, for decades, economic growth has been the unchallenged measure of progress. Economic growth has been the unchallenged measure of progress. Government obsess over GDP figures as though they alone captured the well-being of citizens. Yet, relentless pursuit of growth often corrodes the very foundation of human and ecological welfare. So what the author is saying is that when you talk about progress, it's economic growth that is given the most importance as a predictor of progress here. Governments obsess about GDP figures, though they alone capture the well-being of citizens. Yet, relentless pursuit of growth often corrodes the very foundation of human and ecological welfare. So, it is against human and ecological welfare. When forests become resources and communities labor units, growth morphs into a mechanism of depletion. So, again, the author is working against the point of economic growth here. Now, the paradox deepens when technological efficiency, instead of reducing consumption, accelerates it. So this is the paradox that the author has quoted. A phenomena economists call the rebound effect. True prosperity then may not lie in expanding production but in reimagining sufficiency. An economy obsessed with perpetual expansion resembles an organism that refuses to stop growing. It becomes cancerous. Perhaps it is time to question whether growth, once a tool of liberation, has become the shackle that binds our future. So if you look at this entire paragraph here, the author is against the idea of economic growth because he challenges the notion that it is the predictor of growth. Now it has morphed into a situation where it is the cause of causing harm to the human and ecological welfare, and this is where he has put down the point. So let us now look at the options and try to figure out which options make sense. A says economic growth, once a symbol of progress, now perpetuates environmental and social degradation, necessitating a redefinition of prosperity. So this is something that is very much true with respect to the paragraph here. No such flaws in the options as such, but let's also compare other options. So far it is so good. Let's evaluate B. B says growth must continue despite environmental challenges, for it remains humanity's primary indicator of success. Now, if you look at this option, this is something that is absolutely in support of economic growth, whereas the paragraph in question does not delve into the issue like that. So this is not the kind of interpretation that we're trying to have. So can I say that this is something which is against the tone of the paragraph in question? So this can be easily cancelled out. Let's go to C. It says technological advancement and industrial expansion are the inevitable paths of sustainability. Now we have not talked about sustainability here. Plus the author talks about economic growth here, which is something that is unchallenged as a measure of progress, but then he talks about the counter viewpoint as well. So this is an option that gives you those points which is not the focus of the paragraph per se. So this can also be easily eliminated. Let's now compare D. Without consistent growth, so societies risk stagnation and poverty, making expansion the moral duty of governments. Even this is not the essence of the paragraph here. The essence of the paragraph was about the fact that economic growth alone is not the indicator of progress, and there has to be a kind of redefinition in terms of how we humans understand growth per se. So if you look at these options, the only option that can actually capture the environmental and societal aspect of this problem is given in option number A, making A as the correct answer. Right? So you have to understand how do you eliminate the choices, which are the key points that is given to you, and how do you arrive at an answer that gels with the essence of the paragraph. Let's go to the next question now. Let's practice more. Yeah, so you have the fourth question here. Try doing that. All right, let's try solving question number 4 and see to it whether we can arrive at a right answer. So it says, human beings crave a coherent sense of self, yet the self is anything but stable. It shifts subtly across contexts, relationships, and moments of introspection. So we are talking about the sense of self being anything but stable. So it is not stable. It shifts subtly across contexts, relationships, and moments of introspection. The illusion of continuity is maintained through selective memory and narrative construction. We edit our past, justify our actions, and project imagined futures to create the fiction of identity. Social media has magnified this instability. So we have talked about human beings and their sense of self being anything but stable. It changes, it shifts subtly with respect to context, relationships, and introspection. The illusion of continuity is maintained through selective memory, narrative construction. We edit our past, justify our actions, project imagined futures to create the fiction of identity. Social media has magnified this instability. Curated images and performative expressions further detach the self from authenticity. So it talks about it detaches the self from the authenticity. Ironically, our efforts to appear real online only reinforce our dependence on external validation. The modern self, fragmented and performative, is both empowered and exhausted by constant self-presentation. To know oneself, it seems, is not to discover a stable core, but to accept the self as a dynamic process, a story continually rewritten. So this is what the paragraph is talking about. We have just discussed the important points that was there. Let's look at the options. It says the self is an evolving, construct sustained by narrative illusions and increasingly destabilized by social media's performative culture. This is very close to what the paragraph is actually saying, but let's also look at other options. The self is immutable. Essence. This is problematic, guys, because it does not say it is immutable. It says that it is anything but stable. That social media merely distorts and misrepresents. Now, this does not really capture the sense of the paragraph, so can be eliminated. C says human identity depends on external validation and cannot exist without societal approval. The author has not focused on human identity per se, but he has focused on the concept of a sense of self being a kind of process that is not stable but dynamic in nature. So this is cancelled out. D says psychological well-being. The focus is not only on the psychological well-being, we are talking about the sense of self here. Demands discovering one's true and permanent identity. It does not talk about any sort of dynamic process. It does not talk about the important information that has been highlighted in the paragraph. So this will be cancelled out. Answer would be option number A. So option number A is simply saying self is an evolving construct sustained by narrative illusions, increasingly destabilized by social media's performative culture. So out of these four options, it is only A option that has captured the sense of self, and it talks about evolving construct because it is not something that is stable. It is something that morphs, it shifts subtly, and it also talks about increasingly destabilized by social media's performative culture. So both the points have been included here, making this the correct answer. Let's go to next question, question number 5. Yeah. Try reading through the paragraph, try to get the gist, and then compare your options. Alright, so we have a question. Let's try to answer these questions. So it says democracy's greatest strength, its responsiveness to the people is also its greatest weakness. So again, a very important thought process here, that its greatest strength, that is responsiveness to the people, is also its greatest weakness. The same public opinion that legitimizes governance can be manipulated by populism and misinformation. When emotional rhetoric outweighs rational debate, democracy risks devolving into majoritarian tyranny. So when there is more of emotional rhetoric than rational debate, it devolves into majoritarian tyranny. The media, once the guardian of truth, often becomes an amplifier of noise. The citizens' vote, intended as an instrument of agency, is easily co-opted by narratives of fear and resentment. Yet, despite its flaws, democracy endures because it allows for self-correction. Its vitality depends less on institutions than on the moral imagination of its citizens. So it depends more on moral imagination of citizens than the vitality of the institutions. Their willingness to think critically, dissent courageously, and act responsibly. Now this is important. Democracy fails not when it is challenged from without, but when its citizen cease to defend it from within. Alright, so we have the focus on democracy here, and we have talked about certain things with respect to what democracy is and what it is not. Let's evaluate these options. A says democracy's openness to public influence makes it vulnerable to populism, yet its resilience depends on citizens' moral vigilance and critical thinking. Alright, so very close to what are the thought process that has been given in the paragraph. Let's evaluate B. Despite its susceptibility to corruption. Okay. Now the passage does not exclusively mention corruption as such. So it says democracy remains the only viable system of governance. Now the paragraph does not say that democracy is the only viable system of governance. So this is something that has exaggerated to the point that cannot be taken as an ideal summary. So this distorts the nature. So B is cancelled out. C says the failure of democracy lies in its inability to control misinformation and majoritarian impulses. The author has talked about the plus and the minus side of democracy per se. It just does not only talk about the weaknesses or the negative side of democracy. So C will be cancelled out. Now D says democracy's success depends solely on institutional strength. Now here we read this line which it says its vitality depends less on institution, whereas this option says solely on institutional strength and constitutional safeguards. Even this would be cancelled out. Answer is option A, that makes it the correct answer choice. So that is the option that we were looking for, and something that captures the essence of the text, making A as the correct answer. Right, with this, let's move on to the next question. Sixth one. Alright, so enough of a time to solve this question. Generally, when you solve a paragraph summary question, guys, it should not take you more than 1 or 1.5 minutes, because that is the ideal time you're supposed to get through your answers. So this is what requires your attention in terms of the comprehension also, and in terms of how do you eliminate the choices. So this says every story. Let's go to the next question. It says every story, however imaginative, carries moral implications. So we are referring to a story, no matter how much imaginative, carries moral implications. When writers depict suffering, injustice or desire, they also shape how readers perceive reality. So the story also is something that gives you an interpretation in terms of how do readers perceive reality. The storyteller's power lies not merely in inventing words, but in legitimizing the ways of seeing. So it is all about how do you legitimize the ways of seeing, or then the perception of reality here. Now, to romanticize violence or trivialize grief is to distort empathy itself. Yet, now you have a transition word coming up, and whenever you have a transition word, it's always important for you to understand that there is a shift of an idea coming up. It says, yet complete detachment is impossible. Every narrative is filtered through the author's moral lens. The ethical question then is not whether stories should be moral, but whether they are aware of their moral influence. So there is a moral influence coming up here again and again, and that is a key point. In an age where fiction often blurs into propaganda and art into commerce, storytelling becomes an act of responsibility. To tell a story truthfully is not to record facts, but to reveal the moral texture of experience. So this is what we were referring to in terms of what a story is and what a story is not. And the main idea that we were following is that when you talk about any piece of a story, it is something that also reflects the way you perceive reality. Let's look at the options. It says writers inevitably impose moral perspectives through their stories, making storytelling a deeply ethical act that shapes readers' perception of reality. Now, this is how the paragraph started off, and this is the point that we were discussing. Let's go to B. Fiction should aim to entertain rather than moralize. For art must remain detached from ethics. Now, the author does not say that it remains detached from ethics. It is actually a case of moral lens coming into the picture. So, B is cancelled out. Let's look at C. It says, the best stories are those that avoid moral. The author does not say that the best stories are those that avoid moral bias and focus solely on aesthetic quality. That's not the focus of the passage. Let's go to D. It says, the responsibility of storytelling lies in recording objective facts, not shape emotional truth. It does shape emotional truth. So it is just again contrary to what the paragraph is emphasizing or stressing on, making A as the correct answer choice for this question as well. Right? Let's go to question number 7. Here is the question for you. Alright, let's try to solve this question and arrive at a decent summary here. So it says perfection, long celebrated as the hallmark of beauty, often sterilizes art. So we are talking about perfection here. Long celebrated as the hallmark of beauty, often sterilizes art. True aesthetic power may reside in imperfection. In the crack of a voice, the asymmetry of a face, or the fading of old paint, imperfection humanizes. It invites empathy rather than awe. The Japanese philosophy of wabi-sabi captures this sensibility, finding beauty in transience and decay. So, we are not glorifying perfection here. We are talking about imperfection coming in the picture. In contrast, modern culture's obsession with flawlessness, digital filters, algorithmic art, and mass production has diluted the emotional depth of beauty. When every surface gleams, nothing truly shines. Again, something that is telling you that perfection is not the way forward. The imperfect, because it bears the trace of time and vulnerability, reminds us that beauty is not the opposite of decay but is a companion. So, beauty is not the opposite of decay but a companion. To embrace imperfection is to accept life's fragile grace. So, we should be embracing imperfection there. Let's look at the options now and see to it. A says imperfection embodies the truest form of beauty, offering emotional depth and authenticity that perfection lacks. Alright. B says modern art must reject flawlessness. Now, this is problematic, guys. It does not say that the modern art has to reject flawlessness. On the other hand, it too has to accept it, right? And embrace decay as its primary aesthetic principle. All right. Okay, so it says with respect to the modern art, although we are supporting that imperfection is a way forward rather than perfection. So modern art must reject flawlessness. That's not the intensity that we are looking for, that it must do so. And embrace decay as its primary aesthetic principle. Well, that's not the implication of this paragraph. So I think we can cancel this out. C says perfection remains the ultimate artistic goal. Now, that's not what the author is saying. Even though imperfection occasionally enhances beauty. Alright, so not a very good choice here because it does not talk about the fact that it is a form of beauty offering emotional depth. So, nothing has been said about the emotional depth here. Now, D says the appreciation of imperfection reflects cultural decline and aesthetic confusion in modern society. The author has not made use of these ideas in the discussion of perfection versus imperfection. So, if you look at these options, either this is cancelled out. That says occasionally enhances beauty, this is cancelled out. The only option that justifies the points that is being made in this paragraph is option number A. Imperfection embodies the truest form of beauty, offering emotional depth and authenticity that perfection lacks, making A as the correct answer choice. With this, come to the last question of discussion. Yeah, so you have the last question of discussion here. Okay, so last question for us to deal with in this particular session of a paragraph summary. Let's try this out. It says, science prides itself on objectivity, on its capacity to strip knowledge of bias. Yet, scientific inquiry is never free from human interpretation. Alright, so there's a contrast coming up here that it prides itself on objectivity, on its capacity to strip knowledge of bias, yet scientific inquiry is never free from human interpretation. The questions scientists choose to ask, the frameworks they employ, and the values that fund their work all shape the outcomes of discovery. So there is an element of influence coming up. Technology built upon this science amplifies these biases at scale. Algorithms trained on flawed data replicate social inequities under the guise of neutrality. The illusion of objectivity becomes dangerous when it hides the moral choices embedded in every innovation. Alright. Now, the true scientific humility lies not in denying bias. So, it's not about that you need to deny the bias, but in recognizing and correcting it. Okay, so science not really is something that is objective by nature. So, objectivity then is not a state of but a discipline, a constant vigilance against our own certainties. So, we cannot be absolutely free from bias. It is an element of science here, so that needs to be taken care of, and there has to be an appropriate vigilance against this bias. Let's evaluate these options now. It says, science, though aspiring to objectivity, this is what the passage started off with, remains influenced by human choices and values, making vigilance against bias essential. B says, objectivity in science is an unachievable illusion. Well, this is not the kind of extreme statement that the author is putting it through the passage here. That renders all knowledge unreliable. Now, this is problematic. The author does not say that it renders all knowledge unreliable. C says, scientific progress depends solely on eliminating all forms. Now, this is problematic. All forms of bias from research. Now, this is not really possible. So, this is what we are looking into. Let's evaluate D as well. It says technology has eliminated subjectivity from human inquiry. The author does not say that it was technology that has eliminated subjectivity from human inquiry, creating true neutrality in knowledge production. Now, this is again something that is problematic, right? The option that captures the essence of the text here is option number 8. Says, so though aspiring objectivity remains influenced by human choices and values, making vigilance against bias essential. So, this is what we were looking into, guys. So, with this question, we come to the end of this session on para summary, right? And before we wind it off, just a reminder that LPT is conducting an all India open mock tomorrow. You can register yourself at the website. So, just take this mock and you would have a very good idea in terms of the difficulty level across the 3 sections. So, you can practice this mock and make it sure that your preparation towards CAT 25 is consolidated further. Right, so that's all from my side for today's session, guys. So, we practiced some really good questions of para summary, and with this para summary, we have done those questions that require a certain sense of decision making in terms of how do you answer the questions. Para summary is all about 2 things. One is, of course, the comprehension part, and the second one is how aptly you eliminate the answer choices. That's it from my side. Keep watching these videos, that is enhancing your preparation towards CAT 25, and we would be more than happy to guide you in your preparation towards CAT. So, we are the final lap of preparation. Keep that practice going, keep that momentum going, and you are good to go. So, thank you so much. Have a good day.